Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to enjoy the most creepiest part of the title.
What's a horrifying/creepy experience you have lived through? Serious? When I was maybe 19 or 20, I nearly got run off the road on my way home from work one night. No actual accident, but it shook me up, so I pulled off on the shoulder to calm down before continuing to drive. A windowless van pulled up behind me and a man got out and approached my car. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine, just gathering myself after a scare. He offered for me to wait in the van with his wife and kids. He insisted multiple times that I get in his van. Luckily, my door was already locked, and I had only cracked the window to speak with him. Since he parked his van right behind me, and I could see in my rear view there were no visible passengers in his van. 2. Nothing to do with paranormal or anything, but it was an experience I had while living with my father, who was a recovering hardcore alcoholic. My whole life knowing him, he's been on hard liquor and had troubles quitting. He would often get put into rehab and I'd be sent off to different caretakers. Some were pretty abusive. So, in an attempt to keep me from being sent back to the abusers, he tried quitting without rehab. He also worked in a Salvation Army, so if he got caught drinking he'd be fired or something like that. He lied a lot, so I never bothered asking. This was the first time I ever seen someone have serious withdrawals and didn't understand what was happening at the time. The first stage, we were eating at an event held by the Salvation Army with other recovering addicts, and he couldn't get the food into his mouth. His hands were shaking so badly he just left his food alone after several attempts. He was very irritable while sober, and it only got worse. The second stage, I was woken by him talking to the neighbor for a very long time. He held a full-blown conversion, but nobody was there. I rolled over and asked him who he was talking to, and he said Carol, who was our next-door neighbor. At first I thought he was on the phone, but he wasn't. The third stage was by far one of the worst. We were sitting outside late at night by the apartment's swimming pool and my dad was looking at the trees. I said, "Do you see them?" "See what?" I asked. "The bobcats in the trees." He was literally having hallucinations and was serious about it. He saw other stuff too, but that's all I remembered out of it. The final straw was one day he decided to hop on my bike to grab something from the store in the morning. He made it about 20 feet from the front door on the bike and fell over and knocked himself out cold on some stairs. I was too scared to go outside. Residents of the complex helped him out. He was out of it, had no idea what was going on. I was only 15 and had never seen my dad act this way or get hurt even. He was a mathematical genius and electrician journeyman, and seeing him go through all of this was horrific. He was sent to the hospital for a long time, and I had to stay with a friend. My dad kept drinking after that and ended up passing away 7 years later from liver and kidney failure. 3. I was once at my girlfriend's townhouse, and they had a backyard with a shared fence with a family or group of families. It was dark night, but one of those nights when the light of the town reflects off of the clouds, so it's eerily light out. The fence between the townhome and the family house was old and worn out, so you could see through the gaps if you really focused. We heard a blood-curdling scream, "No!" followed by an immediate soul-crushing inhale. There was probably 50 feet between the glass sliding door we were at and the fence. They had their floodlights on, and it illuminated the silhouettes of the parents crying. Peering through the fence 50 feet away, you could see a body swaying from the tree. Their son had hung himself and discovered it in the dead of night when their dog ran out to the backyard and activated the floodlights. We could only see through the small gaps in the fence and the shadows of the family experiencing it in real time. Still gives me chills every time I think about it. 4. One night of college, I heard a woman screaming for help. I looked out my window and saw her right next to the street. Keep in mind this is a popular college town and the street was busy and there didn't seem to be anything immediately attacking or endangering her. After a few minutes I was about to go down when a car pulled up and 3 guys got out. I could overhear the convo since it was right out of my bedroom, but she said no one was paying attention and they should try some other apartment. They all jumped in and drove off. A month later an apartment got broken into and 4 people were caught, 1 woman and 3 men. Apparently she was in the house and left the door unlocked, and the men then came in and robbed the place. 5. I've seen a lot since I used to live in a bad part of town, but the one that really stood out was when one of the wiremen was literally burnt into a crisp. We were at the church next door, which was at the second floor and had a big window. From the back you could see the wireman doing something, but then suddenly he grabbed hold on a live wire. He tensed up, started shaking, and he couldn't let go. People tried getting him down using wooden sticks, but it only caused him to fall down, still clinging on the live wire. I didn't see anything else after him falling down, but our neighbors said his clothes were burnt off and he was literally charred and unrecognizable. 6. I was driving home from Target at around 8 p.m. at night and got the feeling the car behind me was following me. I started taking a very weird, circuitous way and they stayed behind me, not tailgating, but close enough to not lose me. Finally, they turned, and I felt relieved. Until I turned on a side street, saw an idling car with its lights off, and the headlights came on and they started following me again. I was freaking out and drove as fast as I safely could to the small-town police station. When they saw me turn into the parking lot, they sped off. I sat there until my adrenaline calmed down a bit, and then I drove home and promptly burst into tears. Closest I've ever come to living out a horror movie. 7. My dad used to wake me up in the middle of the night to confront me about the things I didn't do correctly or didn't fulfill to completion. And when that happened, well, it didn't help. My dad has anger issues. Once or twice, he'd threaten and actually try to push me out of my third-story bedroom window and strangled me to the point where I blacked out. Not dead, I think he knew when to stop. It became a regular enough occurrence where I would wake up of my own accord when he would usually wake me up and I would be unable to fall back asleep. So, I would lay there, heart pounding, anxiety becoming very angry, near tears anticipating. When I got to high school I started fighting back, yelling back at him, pushing him backward when he dared come closer. It did cause him to get more violent at first, like when I was pushed off the banister of the staircase on the third floor. But that was the same night when I held up a clothes hanger and threatened to whip him back if he dared lay a hand on me. That same week I went to school. They called the police, which was more than what I wanted them to do, and I was furious at that teacher. But looking back, I thank that teacher with my whole heart. 18 years ago, I was flatting with someone. She had a trip she went on, which left me in the house by myself. I woke up in the middle of the night, it was almost pitch black, and I looked over and saw someone in my room. I had a huge dose of adrenaline and I tried to yell out in the toughest voice I could, "Who are you?" But I was half asleep and it came out like a pirate, "ORRR." It sounds funny to type that, but at the moment it was terrifying. I rolled over in my double bed to gain about 10 inches of distance between us and tried again, "Who are you?" But again I said ORRR. At this point I realized any attempt at sounding like a tough guy had just gone out the window and the panic were rising, until I woke up a little bit more and realized I was yelling at my towel that I draped on my computer chair. I find it hilarious now, but at the time it was horrifying. 9. This was 7th or 8th grade. School just went out and it was raining hard. I walked over to a church parking lot adjacent to the school where my mom usually picked me up. There were several other people that picked up from there, but my mom's car wasn't in the usual spot, so I stood in place and texted her to see where she was. Some guy grabs my attention by asking if I'd like to get into his van to get out of the rain. Never seen the guy, no kids in the van. I obviously declined and said I was okay. He asked again and I said no, walking away, at which then my mom texted me telling me where she was. I probably should have done something, but my mom's car was pretty far away from his and he could have already left. I don't know if anything would have actually happened, but you don't ask some kid you don't know to hop in the front seat of your van. At that point I lived in a safe area. No kids were reported missing, so obviously nobody fell for it. The school he was waiting outside of was a 7th to 12th grade charter. It wasn't that horrifying, just really unnerving, and I used to think about the what ifs because I didn't alert somebody that this guy was being weird.
10. When I was 19, I was 7 months pregnant with my oldest daughter. I still lived with my parents and came home after work around 11:30 p.m. I usually checked that the vehicles were locked before going inside. But this night I was overcome with a sense of immense fear. I wouldn't even look towards my parents' vehicles and hurried into the house. 20 minutes later, a guy knocked on our door telling us that my parents' SUV was on fire and to get out of the house, saving our lives, and we called 911. There was a serial arsonist on the loose in our town, and when he was caught and he confessed, he admitted to watching me come home that night and how he was preparing to hurt me in case I had caught him, but I never looked over his direction as he was sitting in my parents' SUV when I had arrived home. It took years before I was able to be out at night alone. 11. When I was about 6, my parents dropped me off at this swimming lesson class. Now this was back in China over 2 decades ago. I remember that class had a lot of students. Anyways, I was scared of the water and didn't want to go in, and the teacher got frustrated and just tossed me in the deep end. To this day, I remember clearly the panic I felt, the sheer fear as I choked and gagged on the pool water as I sunk lower and lower. It felt like ages before the teacher shoved a long pole into the pool for me to grab onto to pull me out. I remember the sensation of panic and the edges of my vision getting dark. For several years after, I was so terrified of water going over my face that I had trouble showering and washing my hair. I had to force myself to take a deep breath, go under the water and scrub as fast as I could and step out. Every time my heart rate would go crazy, and I would be on the edge of a panic attack. Anyways, it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that this even came up during a family visit, and my grandmother told me that when Grandpa found out, he got so mad he called in favors from his army buddies, literally old revolutionary soldiers from MAO's days, to go in there with high-ranking government officials to scare out of that swimming school/teacher. 12. I was home alone for the weekend when I was in high school, which was exciting for me as I never really had the house to myself ever. I had a few people over the Friday night and got hammered, then the next night it was just me home alone in my house. I had a case of beers left over and had a movie to watch, so I decided that the hangover would not keep me down and to party by myself and have an awesome night. I ended up getting too drunk and felt hungry. I decided to cook mad feed and started whipping up pasta in a drunken slur. I was singing like a maniac while I played MasterChef in my kitchen. Halfway through singing and stirring the pasta sauce, I hear a tapping sound and some movement in the corner of my eye catches my attention. One of the metal chain ropes used to pull the blinds up and down on the glass doors was moving and hitting the glass door, making a tapping sound. I froze as I watched it moving back and forth by itself. Then my focus kind of zoomed out as I realized that that was not the only metal blind ropes that were moving. We have around 7 sets of blinds on the glass doors, and all 7 of the ropes were moving back and forth. My hair stood up and I walked out of the kitchen as all of them were tapping on the glass doors. No windows or doors in the house were open, and they were picking up momentum with the tapping becoming louder and more frequent. I turned around just in time to see the DVD case of the movie I was watching slide off the TV cabinet on its own. I let out a slurred "fark" that and went to bolt outside, just freaking out. On the way out, I saw the painting next to the front door. It had been moved and was tilted. I let out a gasp. I ran out the door and wet myself just a little in the process. Shit was real, the horror was real, this was real. Outside I was so distraught and horrified at what had just happened. My house was haunted. There was a ghost, and it was ducking with me. It didn't like me. I realized that I had left the stove on and that I needed to leave, but needed to grab my phone to call someone and get out of there. I decided I would go to the park and try to contact a friend. So, I psyched myself up, ran into the house, turned off the stove myself, ran into my room, grabbed the key, my phone, and 10 beers. I headed to the park and started drinking again. No one picked up as everyone was wiped out from the night before. Cut a long story short, I vaguely remember being at the park before I blacked out, then in my kitchen crying at some point, then blank. The next day I woke up in my bed. I wondered whether it was just a dream, but I walked out and saw the pasta and DVD case and realized that it was legit. I realized that I had to break the news to my family later that day that our house was haunted and that we would have to move. I went on Facebook, and that's when I saw status after status saying that there had been a minor earthquake during the night. Needless to say, I felt like a hungover idiot, but the truth is that was the first earthquake I had experienced, and we don't get earthquakes where I live. Or not usually, at least. 13. I was kidnapped by an ex. Well, I say kidnapped. It all started with severe blackmail, death threats, having people watch my house, telling me when my family were home, etc. Then he kidnapped me and kept me locked in a hotel room for 3 days. I was beaten, raped, abused, tortured. He was threatening to sell me to a Bulgarian biker gang where I was to be turned basically into their heroin junkie. He had arranged for me to be collected from the hotel the next morning. Luckily, my family had reported me missing, and in the early hours the police managed to find me. I saw my once chance of escape and took it. Thankfully now, he is serving 23 years. I definitely learned a lot about myself in those 3 days. 14. I got in a fight with my mom. She pushed me to bed and started beating the hell out of me. She used nails, hands, elbows, everything. I had to throw a punch to her face and kick her to run away from that room. I literally scared myself because of the fear. I thought I was going to die. Still have nightmares about it. Edit, this blew up. Anyway, I'm so sorry we all have these experiences. I hope all of you are doing better, and I send a hug to all of you. Do not lose hope, there's good people out there. Thank you all for your concern. I'm good now. I have a family now, one that I choose myself, and it feels good. I really hope you can find that for yourselves. By the way, Happy New Year, and sorry if there's any mistake in the post, I'm Chilean so English is not my fiesta language. 15. It's creepier than horrifying. This was right after the mass Las Vegas shooting. I was at my sister's keeping her company, her husband was out of town, and we had her 2 young children. We were talking about the shooting and how probably a lot of people don't run away at the start of a mass shooting because gunfire in real life doesn't sound like it does on TV. At that very moment, we heard this bang bang and I thought it was someone trying to kick in her door. We took the kids to the bedroom and hit the panic button on her security system. It wasn't someone trying to kick in the door. Someone had shot through her front door. 16. The campus house that I lived in had a history. Suicides took place there, previous owners died, and it was old as hell. I stayed there all summer alone because of my job in my college's city, and legit every night I'd hear that. Before I'd chalk it up to one of my 4 other roommates making noise, but now I was alone. I pretty much heard weird almost every night. The first day I got there, I went upstairs to my room, and the second I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a door slam downstairs. Throughout the summer I heard footsteps, doors, and a bunch of other things. I was almost sure, still think this today, that there was a squatter who somehow avoided me all summer. There were days when the front door would be unlocked in the morning when I vividly remember locking it at night. I'd say to myself, okay, here, I am locking the door, and give it a few tugs to make sure it was locked, and it'd be opened come morning. Maintenance usually let themselves in periodically, but I'd call them up and they'd say they hadn't been there. The creepiest one was the door that led up to the attic. It was a regular door, not one of those pull-down ones. Some days it'd be slightly open, and I'd pull on it closed, but it wouldn't open by itself. I'd close it, put a chair in front of it, but it'd still be slidingly open. My roommate came down one weekend when I happened to be gone, and he said he heard a lot of banging as well throughout the night. One day, I straight up yelled, if there's anyone squatting here, I literally do not care, and you can stay, but let me know you're here, and we can set up some simple ground rules. I'm chill. I thought I heard some rustling from the basement, but nothing ever happened. Funny part is, if there was a squatter, I wouldn't have cared too much. It's the college's house, so if someone wanted to be my roommate for the summer, I would have been okay with it as long as they weren't a psycho. 17. It's not supernatural or weird, but I was with my dad when he died. He had cancer, sarcoma, and towards the end his body just started failing. He was in a medically induced coma for the last week of his life, and my mother made the difficult decision to pull the plug when it was determined the cancer had taken over and he wouldn't pull through. In the small hospital room when it was time there was myself, my mother, my older sister, 4 of my dad's closest relatives, a doctor and nurse, and a woman who was there to read his last rites. It was shockingly quiet apart from us softly crying and the woman reading the religious stuff. I'm not religious, so I'm not sure what the proper terminology is here. My dad's face turned a purplish blue shade and his body lightly convulsed, and then it was just over in a couple minutes. At the time I was 17, probably in shock, and very sad, but I didn't think I would linger over the memory as much as I do even now as a 24-year-old. 18. My son was having an anaphylactic reaction while we driving down a major interstate in Atlanta. I had to pull over on the side of 285, the interstate, and give him an EpiPen injection. I called 911 and told them I was driving to CHOA, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, emergency department and coming in hot, and to be ready. Thankfully, we weren't far from the hospital. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. 19. This happened just a few weeks ago, and maybe it will get better with time. But I literally watched my mom die. She was in hospice care for multiple medical issues, but the major thing was she had a stroke, leaving her paralyzed, and kept developing pneumonia. Back in October, she was sent home from the hospital, and we were told that medication was no longer working to treat it and that she shouldn't be brought back in for it. Fast forward to the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and she was sent to the ER for a basic procedure that home health just couldn't do. So, she gets to the hospital, and they run tests, and everything that could be wrong is high potassium, signs of heart failure, signs of liver and kidney failure. They told us she wouldn't make it through the night. We knew my mom wanted to die at home, but the doctors didn't think she would survive the EMS ride back. Her PCP, which is the greatest doctor ever, personally came in, without anyone asking, had the ER do a few things, and they agreed she was stable enough to be sent home. Hospice came that night, and my mom did okay for a few days, but then went downhill fast. My dad asked me to stay with him, and luckily I was working remote. On December 3rd, I woke up having a panic attack. I don't remember a dream or anything, and I just knew that was the last day we'd have her. She was doing okay that morning, but was in a steady decline. We were giving her big morphine doses and doing our best, but she just couldn't breathe. She sounded funny, almost like she was snoring, but her oxygen and heart rate were fine. My dad went to check on her 5 minutes later, and I was in there too. At first, we thought everything was okay, but then her pulse was really low teens, and her oxygen dropped to 10. My dad held her and told her it was okay to let go, and her eyes opened and stared directly at me. 20. After 10 years in an abusive relationship, I finally left my babies. That day, he told me he would find me and kill me and take my kids somewhere nobody would ever find them. So, after warnings from the police that they couldn't keep us safe, we fled interstate, over 3,000 kilometers away. This was after the 4th place we fled to because he kept finding us. This new place, as I said, was thousands of kilometers away, in a brand new housing development that wasn't yet on any maps or even gaps. Emergency services had to physically map they are, as even the streets were brand new. The duplex I was in didn't even look like it existed. It was down the side of another house, through a gate behind a garage. So basically, we were very hard to find on purpose. One night I was out the back about 10 p.m. The backyard was the front yard, but it was all behind a gate that looked like the rear entry to the front property, hanging out the bedding as my kiddo had wet the bed again. The clothesline was right next to the gate, which was 6 foot tall and only had a small gap for a hand to fit through to open the latch. As I was hanging the stuff on the line, I got this sudden fear feeling, almost paralyzing. I slowly turned my head toward the gate just in time to see a black gloved hand pull out of the hole for the latch and the gate slowly begin to open. I said aloud, "No." As my eyes adjusted, I could see a black shoe halfway inside the gate. Luckily, my door for the house was right behind me. As I started to back up towards my door, I told the person on the other side of the gate that I'm going to get the dog. Slide inside, latched the door, and called police. I didn't have a dog at this stage, I do now, and she is a formally trained PPD. The police arrived in less than 2 minutes. When I first moved there, I had been in contact with them. They flagged my phone number and address for immediate response as emergency. They looked around but couldn't find anyone and came to the consensus that the individual had fled down the laneway 4 houses down and done a runner. Police patrolled my circuit every night for the next month. At this time, my ex hadn't made any of his allocated phone calls to the children in a week, which was odd. 2 days later, he rang and let slip to me that he was sorry he didn't call, he just flew back into Main City. Firstly, my ex was unemployed, still is 6 years on, and surviving off dole payments. He lived in a rural town in a different state to that city. Third, had absolutely no need or reason to be flying, especially to that city unless he was coming from interstate, which he also had no need to be in. I couldn't conclude it was him. I had hunch and police believed it might have been also. 2 weeks later, when I was at the police station getting assistance to register my advo in this state, police asked me to complete an application form for security upgrades to my house. Turned out they had a hunch it was him and did some digging. Found out he not only booked plane tickets for that day to my state, he boarded the flight, but they lost track of him after his arrival. Not only that, but they also uncovered messages between him and a relative through Facebook of his plans to kill me when he had found me, with some details, which they wouldn't share. To this day, I don't know why he didn't keep coming through that gate when he had the opportunity. I wonder if me being outside at the time put him off from however he had planned it, and he didn't know I had a dog, which I didn't, but I think my bluff helped to save my life. That, and the fact that I was already flagged with police, so they were so quick to respond. We since moved 2 more times, and now, 6 years later, he is still finding us and knows where we live again due to a police breakdown. I refuse to keep running anymore. This is my life now. 21. Mine is a little different in that it doesn't involve anyone doing anything bad, just nature being nature. I was about 10 and living with my aunt and 2 younger cousins. Littlest one was barely 3. My aunt decided to run to the store for cigarettes really quick. The convenience store was so close I could probably bike there and back in less than 20 minutes. It was a beautiful afternoon around 4:30 or 5. We knew our neighbors and could go to them if we needed help. It was a reasonable thing for my aunt to do. Minutes after she left, the whole sky got dark. My aunt had a fan in her bedroom window upstairs that had 2 sets of blades, one for pulling air in and one for pushing air out. Suddenly we heard it making a crazy noise. We run in there and both blades are spinning the same direction, straining the motor. My oldest cousin, who was around 7, and I struggled to lift the window and pull the fan out so we could shut the window. We managed to get the window up and a huge gust of wind pushed the fan into us and knocks us down. It hasn't been 10 minutes since my aunt left, and the whole sky has gone black and it's absolutely dumping rain. Then I heard the freight train sound and knew exactly what was happening. I took my cousins to the bottom of the tri-level house and huddled with them in a hallway. It literally sounded like a train was charging through the whole house. The windows were rattling. Hail pounding against the walls. We were all terrified and crying. Then my little cousin started yelling that his mom was knocking on the door. I insisted it was just the hail. My other cousin and I held on to him, but he broke free and ran upstairs to the door. He was absolutely right and let my aunt in. She carried him downstairs and huddled up with us. Then a giant tree branch shattered the living room window right next to the front door. It probably would have killed my aunt if my cousin didn't open the door. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 or 30 minutes before it was over, and the sun came out again. It ripped the roof off the garage. Our living room was filled about 6 inches deep with hail and debris from where the branch crashed through the window. It was one of the most terrifying things I've ever lived through. I still get panic attacks when we get tornado warnings or really bad storms.
22. In 2016, I laid my motorcycle down going about 45 miles per hour. When I knew I was going to wreck, I had just enough time to realize that this was not going to be good. Everything went black and I came to standing in the middle of the road watching the crash. I watched my body flop across the pavement and didn't really care. Everything was more real than I've ever known. The colors were brighter and just more, the birds chirped in the most beautiful way you could imagine. Everything was super focused except the body and bike, they looked different somehow. I don't know how to describe it. I noticed a male presence, that I never saw, silently pushed me and I was back in my body. I sat up in the ditch, wiped the blood from my eyes and slowly got up and started walking for help. I was by myself, couldn't lift my bike, and hadn't told anyone where I was going. I made a lot of mistakes that day, going alone without having my license, taking back roads I wasn't familiar with, not wearing gear, not wearing a helmet, etc. I was dumb, but that experience changed my life. 23, I was out to eat with my family, and my dad, who is usually super calm, while about to eat a Cubano sandwich he always orders at our spot, yells "Holy shit," and turned white. I asked what happened, and he stammered that some guy just fell. I turn around and there is a man on the pavement motionless. Without thinking, I darted out of the restaurant and crossed the street without even looking to try and help him. I am lucky I didn't get hit by a car doing so. Well, it was too late. He was dead. Blood was absolutely pouring out of his mouth, head, nose. I shouted at him to try to get him to respond, and he laid motionless. I then turned my back on him and called 911. Someone must have already called, or by chance, a fire truck was nearby. They rushed over, but it was too late. Immediately threw a white sheet over him. A week later, a detective called me. They ruled out suicide, so it may have been an accident, or a homicide. He had fallen from the 5th floor around dinner time. I saw his face for weeks randomly. I still have no idea what happened. Haven't been back to that restaurant since. The fucked up thing was his blood stain was on the pavement for months after, faintly there, people walked right past it likely unknowing. The red tape that clung to the pole remained barely attached, weathering away. No one ever put flowers out for this guy. I wonder if he could hear me screaming at him, or if he was already dead. 24, I had a stepdad, and he was heavily on drugs. We are talking meth and heroin. My mom finally decided to leave him after 6 years when he threatened our lives. We had to go into hiding and get a restraining order. We later moved in with my nana, not so far from the area where we originally lived. There was nothing scarier than seeing a car that looked similar to his or going to the store and seeing someone who looked like him. You would basically freeze in fear. I hated living with him because he was abusive as well. 25, it was the creepiest thing to happen to me. On mobile. When I was 15, my mom dropped me off at our town center's library to meet with my friend. We were supposed to meet there for a school project. She dropped me off and left to do errands. As I was heading in, there was this homeless guy sitting on the nearby bench. I froze, strange feeling came over, and speed walked in without looking at him much. While looking for a book for the project, my mom popped up out of nowhere. Less than 2 minutes had passed. She makes pleasantries with me and takes me through the sections. She tells me to pretend to look for a book on the bottom shelf. Weirded out, I do. She then tells me, "You're being followed by the same homeless dude. He's not alone." Lo and behold, the man is pretending to look around, but still trying to keep me in his line of vision. With another person. Couldn't tell if it was another person. My mom noticed this as she was pulling out of the library parking lot and pulled a U-turn. I don't remember how we got out of his sight. My friend luckily couldn't make it that day. 26, I'm a cybersecurity guy for hire and have done a lot of work that was pretty messy, but this is one of the more immoral/messed up ones. A few years back I did some work with the Kurdish Peshmerga in Iraq as a favor for an old friend who grew up there. Around when I was working, ISIS had stepped up their counterintelligence and intelligence game, with the thing.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.